Hi, Tyler. How are you today?
Hi, Kimberly. I'm doing well. TGIF and happy Friday to you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been an exciting day here in Dripping Springs with a new calf born on the ranch. So we welcomed Haas today.
Very nice. That's definitely an appropriate name. And maybe you can bring Haas down to the beach. It's 95 and sunny out. And I'm looking at the Gulf of Mexico right now. So it's a nice view.
Very good. Very good. Well, thank you for joining today. Today, I'd like to talk about incident response. So if you don't mind just telling us, what is an incident response?
Well, I think 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago for that matter, it was a rather controlled exercise, and there was a lot of structure around it. And ever since the advent of ransomware, these attacks have been weaponized. We recently read in the news there was actually a death associated with ransomware. It was in a hospital. A hospital was under attack. I can't remember the specific area of where that occurred. But the hospital was crippled by a ransomware attack. They had to move a patient because they couldn't treat that patient, and the patient actually died en route to another hospital.
Oh,
So
my goodness.
yeah, we're talking about a whole nother level now. We're talking about it is sometimes a matter of life and death in a physical sense, and it's also a matter of life and death in the business sense, of which we see all the time of these crippling attacks. IGI, we always try to get organizations to prepare, be proactive, and we're always hammering that in. Even though some of the exercises to clients can seem mundane at times, they matter. Doing those incident response tabletop exercises and guiding staff through that process, because we all heard the cliche, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and it's so true. We came into the COVID scenario here, and everything was just flipped upside down. The whole world was tipped on its head. And that includes IT, that includes technology and business and the way that they operate. So you have a lot of learning how to do business in a very new way, which we know anytime there's any kind of social or global change in anything, attackers, they take full advantage of that. Let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about what are the steps. What can your organizations do? How do they prepare? How do they defend themselves? And then, what are we seeing out there? And we've got some just crazy war stories. We've always got war stories, but now, as of the last few weeks, we've got another one that was a doozy.
Right. I mean, just in the last month, I think we've had 1 to 2 incident response calls a week, many times on a Friday. But I think recently we had one of the worst attacks you guys have seen since your military days, correct?
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad. I mean, this was an all-out assault, extremely calculated against an organization, involved serious ransomware at a level that was extremely widespread across multiple sites, and it really crippled the entire business. It took the business from fully operational one day and brought that business to its knees, and had every single person within that business involved at a moment's notice, all the way up to the CEO. Everybody in one day knew exactly how important cybersecurity was. That attack in particular was very tricky. And when I say that it was targeted, we're going to talk about that just a little bit, and some of the things that these attackers are doing. So long gone are the days to where there's just a ransomware attack and they ask for maybe $700 in Bitcoin, right? Those days are long gone. In this particular attack, they were asking for over $5 million in the initial request to bring the business back up and running. And they also mounted supplemental attacks against the organization. So while all this madness is going on with this huge ransomware attack, servers are down, users are down, you can't work, you can't ship, you can't produce. They're also getting hit with wire fraud, phishing emails, right? So you've got your staff that is now very confused and disoriented, and they're getting hit with social engineering attacks. Taking it a step beyond that, the attackers actually took it upon themselves to call the Verizon or AT&T cell provider of some of the senior leadership in the organization, and convinced Verizon or AT&T to port over all of the information from the user's cell phone onto their quote-unquote new cell phone. It's called SIM swapping. You have SIM cards in your phone, and once you do a SIM swap, the attackers, they have everything. They have everything that's on your iPhone. They have all your contacts. They can read your messages. They can get into your listen. Don't store notes on your iPhone notes. Please don't do that. Use something else, because if your phone does get compromised, It's a very bad experience. So it was a multi-threaded attack. The attackers were coordinating and chatting directly with the CEO of the organization and the senior leadership. And it was a pretty hairy scenario. So very expensive, extremely expensive. Could have been prevented with some very easy basic steps. And that's really the theme as we look across incident response. Is it's a complex situation when you get into it, when you're on the tail end of an incident and when something's already happened and there's been an explosion, right? But preparing for it to avoid that is actually a set of simple exercises and techniques that you can perform, and we can help you perform throughout the year to make sure that we don't wind up in that situation.
Great. So can you tell me the steps of an incident response? Like what happens when I know when I first get the call, I, assemble the team of experts and we get on the call with the client and we start the process. So what happens when I, hand the ball off to you guys?
Yeah. So, the textbook process for incident response is preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and then lessons learned, right? What do we learn by getting hit this hard, right? We don't usually have the luxury of going through that preparation step with the clients that call us on a random Friday. It always happens on a Friday at 4 o'clock. We have a running joke on the incident response team. 4 o'clock hits on a Friday, we're usually getting that call. Opportunistic by the attackers, and I think that they do it on purpose just to get under our skin sometimes. So that process really begins with the identification, right? It begins with a conversation of us asking a series of questions. How did it happen? Who's involved? When did it happen? How far is it spread? What have you done in the meantime? What kind of technologies do you have to help? Do you have your legal involved? Do you have the senior leadership in the company involved? Because believe it or not, sometimes this information is kept from the senior leadership when it should be shared with them. So we start to ask these probing conversations, and hopefully, our goal is to get in front of that situation as quickly as possible. We know that something bad has happened and it's all transpiring very quickly, but the attackers are they're not done. They're still in that environment. They're still wreaking havoc. And as soon as we can get all that information very quickly, we can start to get to work and we can start to direct their staff to do certain things, and we can start to direct our staff to do certain things as well. So it's that identification phase that's absolutely critical in just getting things started. Yep.
Very good. And then what happens?
So after that, then we go into containment mode. So we figure out where and what is affected by this particular either data breach or ransomware attack or cyber attack. We figure out what are the assets that are affected. Are they physical? Has somebody physically gone into one of the buildings, and do we have to deploy out somebody from our team to go physically to a location, or is this a logical attack? Is it just within a server environment or in a workstation environment? Once we understand exactly what are the cordoned off areas of this attack, we start to contain that with the customer. So we take that pool of infected or affected systems or assets, and we start to put those into their own unique little infected bubble, right? That is like ground zero. We put the logical caution tape around that by segmenting those environments, and then we start to go to work from a couple of different ways. So our organizations that we work with, they always want to know who did it, how was it done, and how do we counteract this in the future. So that's always something that's top of mind as we go through that that analysis portion and looking for what are the root causes of these things, which is an extremely challenging experience. We can get into that a little bit later. But once we have all those systems quarantined, then we go to work on there's a strategy point, right? So there's a decision point, and I always lean towards ransomware because they're the most destructive. There's a decision point for organizations of whether or not do you want to rebuild net new, or do you want to clean up the infected systems? Cleaning infected systems in 2020 is pretty much a no-go for incident responders. They say don't even bother, because the malware that's out there today it can be advanced enough to hide from any kind of detection tool that you have, and requires just an inordinate amount of time for manual analysis to go and sifting through all that stuff. So usually it's an exercise of let's rebuild the environment. Business questions start to come into play. The CEOs in the top, they usually ask, how long is that going to take, right? And when they're told 2 to 3 weeks, that could spell millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in losses for them, or it could put them out of business. So that's a really strategic decision point that brings in everybody from the business side and from the IT side and from the security side, and we all collectively put our heads together on what we're going to do. Now, in the midst of all this, there's PR fallout as well, right? So what we traditionally see, unfortunately, our employees are going out on Twitter and they are saying, my company was hit by a cyber attack. We're down hard, or we were hit with a ransomware attack. We don't know what to do, right? So they're sharing that information out to the public. And that's another aspect that we always recommend. Control that. Speak to your area managers and let them know. Please tell your employees, don't spill the beans on social media. This is not public information, and it can really damage your reputation. And that's that marathon that happens after an incident, to where your name is mud. And unfortunately, that is the case. The organizations, they don't do anything wrong. They're not being negligent, but they are painted in a dim light because they are hit with a cyber attack and they've got to deal with that afterwards. So the name of the game is getting the attackers out of the environment, making sure that we can work in a secure area, that our communications are not compromised. So anytime we have an incident like this, we've learned over the years the attackers can be watching. They're watching email. In this case, they were watching somebody's phone. So if they're messaging about the incident, or here's what we're going to do next, the attackers are also watching what those next steps are. So it's become a very tactical operation that's extremely militaristic, and that's how we have to handle these things nowadays. It went from low-level attacks that, frankly, we're getting lucky, to now extremely pointed attacks against specific industries. And these attackers are doing their homework. They're very, very good. You almost sit back in awe sometimes of their capabilities, and you wish that they would become pen testers on our team and come to the light. But unfortunately, they don't. Their game is very lucrative, and they're getting millions of dollars in payouts on a daily basis, and they're very well funded. So it's difficult.
How scary. How scary. Yes, I know. Even with simple attacks, it can be very disorganizing and to a company. And sometimes, I've seen us also stop attacks before it became ransomware, and I've seen us stop attacks before it was a breach or anything was leaked from the company. So, the public didn't have to be notified. We were able to contain it.
Yeah.
So, we've been fortunate in some of those. Even yesterday, where we had a partner, right, who got hit with a Dropbox, and it sent out a bunch of malware. And
right.
I think, so even any size organization can be a victim. And like you said, it can be so disruptive that it could, put them out of business. We've seen, ones where it's almost thwarted a merger and acquisition. So it really can be detrimental to a company. So really, hats off to you and your team, especially for working on weekends, overtime. I know y'all labored over Labor Day, and but really grateful that you guys are on our team and working hard to fight those cyber terrorists.
Yeah, it's a profession that's not for the faint of heart, for sure. We get a lot of people that do transition over from the IT realm, and they realize that this is a whole new level. I mean, we're essentially, we're at war. That's why, a lot of people on my team are comprised of veterans, right? Military veterans. They have a different mindset about these things, and they do treat it tactically. But essentially, we are at war on a daily basis. And those victories that you talk about, those little tiny victories that we have, we always make sure that we make those, exemplified. We magnify those, because those are really important. When you're able to get in front of something, and it may be something simple, it may be just a phishing attack that your organization realizes, hey, this is coming through. Some of our users are getting this. Let's push out a message to everybody. Let's let them know what's going on. Communication, I think it's the key in anything, including relationships, business endeavors, and incident response and cybersecurity. Communication is literally everything, and we find that having that clear path of communication is really fundamental. And what we really work with our organizations on, from a like a virtual CISO level, and from a preparation standpoint, is getting that authorization. We know this stuff's going to happen. We know there's no doubt about it. But what we try to do with our organizations, this is something, a message to relay to all organizations, is to have a plan in place and talk about it, that if these things do happen, give somebody, implicit authority to make decisions on the fly. Because it happens so quickly, what we often wind up in is a situation to where an organization is hit with a ransomware attack, and maybe it got 10 or 12 servers, right? It's relatively contained, but we're not able to shut down the rest of the environment and stop that attack from happening because nobody has authorization. The CEO is saying, no, we can't shut down our ERP because it's going to shut down business. We're going to lose like $100,000 a day. And while those conversations are happening, the attackers are in there meddling and they're propagating that attack throughout the environment. So you wind up with like a 3-week outage. You're losing millions of dollars because a decision couldn't have been made. Be decisive and take action, like immediate action. This isn't just the game of malware that we're playing with anymore. We're not playing with denial of service attacks so much. Ransomware, there's no way out of it. Your only best bet is to have backups. And in, I think, maybe 80% of the cases that we've worked with ransomware, they're deleting the backups. They're getting rid of them. They're doing their homework.
Right.
They're getting into the networks. They're either going up to, in this last case, into cloud backups, and they're going in there and deleting those backup volumes. So they really have nothing. So by the time we respond, the organizations are in a position to where it's not a matter of are they going to pay, it's how much do they need to pay, right? And that's a really tricky scenario that nobody wants to pay these people. Nobody does, but businesses, they do have to stay afloat. So.
Right, and I was going to ask you because a lot of times people ask me, well, if I have backups, will I be covered? And so you're saying not necessarily. So tell me 3 things that a company can do to be proactive and really make cybersecurity as a foundational business initiative.
Yep. Number one thing is accountability. That's number one. When you get into an incident response scenario, there's always finger pointing. Somebody didn't do this or somebody did this wrong. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter, right? Establish accountability within your organization. Find that person who is not just you're going to hold that person accountable, but that they know what they're doing, right? That's the main thing. Make sure that the person who is accountable and in charge of your security is credentialed and experienced enough to do so, right? Just being in IT, as we all know, it's a different realm, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a security expert. So if you have to procure that outside help to have that accountable person or that accountable group, please do so. That's number one, just having somebody with the responsibility that cares about your security to see it all the way through, right? Number one. Number two, and also with that number one, that's got to come from the top, right? That has to be set in stone by your leadership that everybody is subscribed to. Now, this is, in the way that I often equate this to businesses, is imagine, and this is when we're talking to the C-level, imagine that your business, right, even if you're in Wisconsin or upstate New York, wherever, you are now in one of the most hurricane-prone areas of the world. That's where your physical business is located because ransomware is that destructive. So you have to plan accordingly all the way from the top down and find people who are accountable. That's number one. Number two is have a plan. Don't write your own plan from, nothing from good ideas and think you're doing the right thing. Have a plan that's predicated on a foundation, a solid foundation of security, a framework, right? NIST, CIS 20 critical controls, PCI even works, HIPAA to some degree, right? Have that plan set in stone from a solid foundation of security that's industry trusted and accepted, right? So have that. Then obviously you've got to execute against that. And then also prepare for the worst. Right? Prepare for the worst, the inevitable, right? At some point, your organization is going to be affected by a cyber attack. The name of the game is not to never have a cyber attack occur, because they will occur, but it's to limit the damage. And if you can figure out unique ways on how to limit that damage, then you're in a better spot than most. So hold people accountable, find those names and make sure they understand what their job duties entail. And if they're not qualified, procure somebody who's qualified, have them set out a plan and present that to the organization so that everybody subscribed. When they come to you and they say, I need XYZ tool for this specific area, or I need to make a big modification, it's going to affect how users operate. Guess what? You're not going to be able to install your own software anymore, everybody in the company, because now you have administrators doing that. Make sure that those messages are very clear. For each little piece of a security control, whether it be taking away local admin rights from a user or not allowing USBs, there's a scary story behind that we can give you. So if you want some scary stories, and if you need that justification, just give us a call and say, what should I say to my CEO because they're not letting me take away local admin rights from our user? We can say, well, we've got a few stories for that. So those, and then you gotta take action on that plan and just keep driving forward, and then plan for the worst. Planning for the worst means secure your backups. Ransomware, watch out for it. the basics, MFA, securing your backups, making sure that you have redundancy, and those types of things. And then there's about a million other things that go in between those. So.
Very good. So MFA is multi-factor authentication.
Correct. That threw an acronym out there, multi-factor authentication on everything, right? Not just your email. Call your cell providers and let them know, I want to prevent somebody from being able to take my SIM card from my phone and port it over to another one. MFI on everything, cloud accounts, business accounts, personal emails, because that's where these attacks sometimes start. They start with like somebody's Yahoo account. They start to get a little bit of information. They've got somebody in the company, and then they start to work their way in, right? Company defenses may be relatively strong, and they may be pretty fortified. But if you can side route into somebody's personal life through their Facebook account, through their social media, and then start to work your way up that chain, that's what these people are doing. They're not starting at the front doors of the company. Usually they're starting around the back and then working their way in.
Yeah, it's quite frightening. And people want to be helpful until they click on things. So.
True. Very true. Very true. We do have habitual clickers that we often see, and training is a big thing as well. That security awareness training aspect is absolutely critical.
Absolutely. Well, Tyler, thank you for your time today explaining about incident response. We know it's unfortunately a big trend. It's a way to really, bring a company to their knees. Always better to be proactive. I know we are always available to discuss cybersecurity as a business strategy and how we can be of assistance.
Yes,
thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the conversation, and everybody stay safe out there. Spread the message, be proactive. Like Kimberly said, it's better than the reactive side. It's much better. So let us know how we can help.
Less expensive.
Very much so. Very much so. Yep.
All right. Have a great day, Tyler. Thank you.
Thank you. You too.